Our focus today is Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 23. First thing, we'll talk about God's saving power, which is needed, versus God's wrath. Paul turns from the gospel's saving power to the reason that saving power is necessary. In other words, we'll discuss the flip side of this coin, which is God's wrath. Not only is God's righteousness and saving power revealed and explained in the gospel text, but God's wrath is also revealed against human unrighteousness in humanity's experience and behavioral outcomes and consequences. Humanity's deepest problem is not that God has hidden himself. The deeper problem is that sinners suppress the truth God has made plain. Paul's reflection in this passage moves from the revealed wrath to suppressed truth, to rejected worship, and finally to the exchange of God's glory for idolatrous falsehood. In regards to the wrath that's revealed, Paul begins with a solemn statement that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. The wrath is not uncontrolled anger. It's not emotional volatility. And it's certainly not divine irritation. But rather, it is God's righteous opposition to all ungodliness and unrighteousness. His wrath is revealed because sin is not merely human weakness or social disorder. It's deeper than that. It is rebellion against the truth of God. That rebellion shows itself as irreverence towards God. And that irreverence produces disorder in human life. When the Creator is not honored, the creaturely world is no longer understood rightly. The failure to worship God as God leads to a failure to live rightly before Him and before others. Truth suppressed by humanity at large. Paul says sinners suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The problem is not absence of truth. The truth is present, but it's held down. It turns out that humanity does not merely lack information. Instead, humanity actively resists revelation. Sin does not leave the truth untouched. It presses against it. It restrains it. Paul is not describing innocent ignorance. He is describing instead moral suppression. The truth is resisted because unrighteousness does not want God's claim to stand. Human sin seeks to live in God's world while refusing God's authority over it. This would explain why God's wrath is just. Creation as a witness. Paul then explains why the suppression leaves humanity guilty. What is known of God is revealed in them, because God Himself has revealed it to them. God has not left Himself without witness. What can be known of Him has been made plain because God Himself has made it plain. God has made Himself plain to humanity through many means. And one of these ways, in great part, is seen through and in creation. Paul says that God's invisible things, His everlasting power and divinity, are clearly perceived through the things that are made. The created world does not reveal everything that may be known about God savingly, but it truly reveals enough to make humanity accountable. Creation is clear in its message about its Creator. It's clear in its witness, how it testifies that God is powerful, that He's divine, and that He's worthy of honor. The apparent obvious beauty and the reality of created things all testify that the world is not self-originating or self-sustaining. In other words, the invisible God makes His attributes perceptible through visible creation. Creation points beyond itself to the God who made it. Paul's conclusion is direct in this matter. He says, because humanity has all the obvious evidence, they are simply without excuse. They are without excuse because God made himself known. The guilt lies not in the lack of revelation, but in the rejection of what God has revealed. Worship is purposely withheld. Paul next identifies the proper response that humanity has withheld. Paul states, knowing God, they did not glorify him as God, and they did not give thanks. This knowledge of God should have produced worship and gratitude. The proper response should have been to acknowledge God as the Creator and to owe him honor and give thanks for his goodness. But sinners refused to do any of this. They did not glorify him as God. They would not give him the weight, reverence, and worship due to his name. And, as we said before, they did not give him thanks. They received the gifts of creation while rejecting the giver. This heart posture is the heart of human rebellion, taking life from God's hand while refusing to acknowledge God as God. How this leads to inward collapse. The result of this is inward collapse. Paul says the effect of this rebellion is that humanity became vain in their reasoning, and their senseless heart was darkened. When worship is refused, reason does not remain neutral. For instance, thought becomes futile because it is cut loose from the truth of God. The heart becomes darkened because it turns away from the light that was given. This does not mean fallen humanity loses all ability to think, create, organize, or observe. But it does mean that human reasoning, when severed from the honor of God, becomes vain in its ultimate direction. It may still operate, but it no longer leads a person to worship the Creator. The mind may claim insight, while the heart sinks deeper into darkness. How wisdom becomes folly. Paul's final argument exposes the tragic irony of sinful wisdom. Paul states, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. You see, humanity's rebellion in its narcissism does not usually present itself as foolish. Instead, as you'll notice, it often claims sophistication, maturity, and enlightenment. Yet when wisdom rejects the Creator, it becomes folly before God. The folly appears in several ways. It appears in the exchange of God, for instance, for lesser things. Scripture explains that they traded the glory of the incorruptible God for the likeness of an image of corruptible man, or of birds, or four-footed animals, or creeping things. This is the downward movement of idolatry. The glory of the immortal God is exchanged for images drawn from the mortal and creaturely realm. This exchange reveals the disorder at the center of sin. Humanity does not stop worshiping, but rather, humanity redirects worship away from God. When the Creator is rejected, created things are elevated into the place only God should occupy. The creature does not become greater by this exchange. Instead, what happens is that humanity becomes degraded because it gives ultimate honor to what is beneath the God who made all things. We are without excuse. Romans chapter 1, 18-23 therefore shows that God's wrath is revealed not because humanity never knew who God was or had evidence of God, but because humanity suppressed what was known about God. The passage does not begin with idolatry as an isolated mistake. It traces idolatry back to its root. In part, at least, the process, the downward path goes like this. First, truth is suppressed. God is dishonored. Gratitude is withheld. The reasoning then becomes futile, and the heart becomes darkened. And in this process, the glory of God is exchanged for futility and creature-centered worship. And often, the creature being worshipped is self itself. As a summary then, humanity stands without excuse because the Creator made himself plain, and sinners traded his glory for the lie of creature-centered worship.